What's up guys, CJ from Team Millennium Ninja here, back with some serious deja vu. Not because I'm back covering Tenchi once again, but because I feel like I've seen this plot before? Ah well, I'm sure it's nothing. Anyway, today I'm going to be covering the very first of the Tenchi Muyo Manga, which, to be honest, I didn't even know existed until like last year. Seriously, did you guys know there was a manga? Well, technically there's two, but not really. And for the sake of my sanity, for now I'll only be covering the first of the manga, and I'll cover the second once we get into the early 2000s era. But for now, we just have the first series, known simply in Japan as Tenchi Muyo Ryo-ohki, and localized in English as No Need for Tenchi, which, as I've been over before, is just the literal translation of Tenchi Muyo. Though I do appreciate the name change, as it makes it much easier to differentiate from the anime, which is good because unlike most manga which get adapted into anime, Tenchi is one of those rare manga that's based off an already existing anime. Though instead of adapting the plot of the OVAs, instead it branches off into its own story, using the events of OVA 1 as a basis, with the manga being both written and drawn by Hitoshi Okuda and serialized in a monthly shonen magazine from September of 1994 to December of 2000, spanning 80 chapters and 12 volumes, even including a manga adaptation of the first movie, which doesn't actually have anything to do with the rest of the manga, with it being its own story using the events of OVA 1 as a jumping off point, rather than an actual adaptation of any other series, let alone one that connects to universe. And the manga was adapted into English by Viz back in the early 2000s during the big Tenchi boom. And the only reason I even bring up the English adaptation is because of one very interesting change they made that I've never seen in any other English adaptation of a manga. They flipped the pages. That's right, so instead of reading right to left like your typical manga, instead the Tenchi manga reads left to right in English, which was really disorienting to me at first, since I'm much more used to reading manga the typical way, and like I said, I've never seen this from any other English adaptation of a manga. But I guess this adaptation was done back in the day before manga was more popular in America, with it being more rare to see. So I think they tried to market it more as a graphic novel or a comic rather than a manga, which makes more sense in the context of the time, but like I said, is very disorienting nowadays. But with all that out of the way, I think I've covered pretty much everything you need to know about this manga aside from the plot. So let's jump into the story and see what it has to offer the universe of Tenchi Muyo. The manga starts off with a recap of the events of the first OVA, covering everything that happened with Kagato and how all the girls came to live at the house, leading into the start of the manga where, and stop me if you've heard this one before, a doppelganger of Ryoko, who is made by an old scientist acquaintance of Washu, attacks the members of the Masaki household. Oh, you haven't heard this one? Cool. All jokes aside though, while its premise is very similar to the Zero Ryoko arc from OVA 2 on paper, in execution the two are pretty different. Mostly in terms of the amount of action, as the manga is much more action focused in this arc than the OVAs typically are, as well as the arc being less a retread of the Zero Ryoko arc and more a rehash of the Kagato arc, with the arc's villain, not Kagato, seeking to test Tenchi's Lightning Eagle sword against a sword of his own creation, with Lightning Eagle being what they call the Lighthawk sword in this translation for some reason. As not Kagato's life's work is to create the strongest sword in the universe, with him having worked together with Washu and Kagato in the past in that pursuit, as well as him later creating Minagi, the Ryoko lookalike with data he stole from their creation of Ryoko. And in order to coerce Tenchi into fighting him, he takes Ayeka as a hostage to try and bring out Tenchi's abilities, as much like in OVA 2, Tenchi isn't able to manifest his Lighthawk abilities on his own yet. So not Kagato gives him 10 days to master them in order to rescue Ayeka, but Tenchi's pretty gung-ho about going to save her right away, which Ryoko tries to prevent by knocking him out and going herself to save Ayeka. And something this manga does really well off the bat is capture the essence of these characters and give them some good focus, which is something I definitely appreciate since the OVAs tend to water down their unique characteristics over time. So it's fun to see Ryoko still be more brash and hard-headed, but with a sensitive side that only really seems to pertain to Tenchi, as well as Ayeka still being more antagonistic towards Ryoko. Though this arc does show some interesting dynamics between the two when Ryoko comes to save Ayeka, showing the more diplomatic side of their sibling-like relationship. Also with more focus on action in the manga, Ryoko can return to being a real powerhouse, proving she's still strong enough to take on powerful opponents. First against Minagi, and then not Kagato. Even though she does end up losing to not Kagato, she still puts up a good fight, which is nice to see after getting more or less sidelined recently in the OVAs. And her fight sets things up for Tenchi to come in and save the day and the princess. And I think you all know how this song and dance goes. So instead of boring you guys with that, I think I'll take this time to talk about Minagi and not Kagato. Or Yakage, I guess. Because while he plays pretty much the same role in this arc as Kagito did back in OVA 1, he isn't portrayed nearly as villainously as Kagito was, with him having a more fatherly-like affection for Minagi, which is kind of a novel concept for the series, since the only villains we've really had so far have been Dr. Clay and Kagito, with them both being more dastardly and not really caring about anyone else except for themselves. But Yakage and Minagi's relationship is somewhat similar to the mother-daughter relationship between Washu and Ryoko, which the manga really drummed up earlier in the arc, probably in order to create this parallel, and it works out pretty okay, but there's definitely a reason I was calling Yakage not Kagito before. He's just too similar with not enough big differences in his character or in the arc to make an interesting enough distinction between the two. And in Tenchi Muyo, if it's between you and Kagito, he's definitely going to be the more memorable antagonist. And so the arc wraps up with Tenchi beating Yakage and Minagi leaving to bury him. Afterwards, we catch up with Mahoshi 3 months later, delivering a message from Minagi, saying she's following Ryoko's lead and becoming a space pirate, but one that only targets bad people. And the arc ends with Sasami saying that Minagi will be back someday. And I didn't really touch on Minagi and Sasami's friendship, mostly because it was super rushed and didn't really have an impact on the arc as a whole. Despite that though, this arc is a pretty good start to the manga, and while it may not be as adventurous or unique as previous entries of the franchise at this point, it still offers a pretty interesting jumping on point that shows its strengths. As well, I enjoy jumping into a more plot-focused arc right off the bat, rather than starting off with more slice of life stuff. Stuff the manga does get into after the first arc though, with some standalone chapters that follow the daily lives of the main cast. Like after the Akage battle, we get some chapters that go over Tenchi being sick and the girls trying to take care of him, a similar idea to which also comes up in OVA 3, as well as a chapter following Mahoshi getting her driver's license, one that reminded me a lot of the DBZ filler episode where Goku and Piccolo try to get their licenses. And afterwards, we get a run of a few different 2-chapter mini arcs, starting off with Sasami getting lost with the wolf, who everyone thinks is feral and dangerous, but is actually nice and helps Sasami out. And the manga tries to portray Sasami as helpless in this little section, which doesn't really mesh with the future of the OVA canon, as well as the fact that she's still assimilated with Tsunami in this canon, which we see in the next set of 2 chapters, which is about a childhood friend of Tenchi's visiting the house. And this is Tenchi Muyo, so of course you know it's gotta be a girl. But she actually turns out to be the ghost of Tenchi's old friend, who recently was in a car accident and barely clinging to life, using her possibly last bit of time on Earth with a loner body she acquired in a method I can only describe as somehow to test Ayeka and Ryoko to see if they're worthy of Tenchi, with her life being saved by Tsunami at the end. And this story was kind of fun, featuring what these days would probably be considered a classic or tired harem trope, which might have been a bit fresher at publication. Also with a bit of a spiritual twist you never really get to see in the OVAs, with the girl actually turning out to be a ghost, which is at least something unique about it that I can appreciate. And the final in this run of 2-chapter mini arcs is a magical girl Pretty Sammy story, an area of the Tenchi universe where I have very little expertise. But hey, the 3-episode OVA is next up on the timeline, so I guess I'll be covering that after I finish with the manga. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. And since I'll probably talk more in depth on the premise in that video, here I'll just go over the basic differences, like Tenchi and Sasami being brother and sister, as well as them having a completely new character as a mom, who doesn't actually show up in the chapters outside of the panel where she's introduced, with the rest of the main cast, including Kiyone, who doesn't actually exist in the manga canon, all having bit parts in the story, like Ayeka and Ryoko being Tenchi's schoolmates, Washu being a science teacher, and Kiyone and Mahoshi working at Tenchi and Sasami's mom's CD store. Oh, talk about retro. Man, I feel old. And the story is kind of your standard magical girl episode, I assume with my limited knowledge of magical girl anime, with Sasami and her partner, the series' talking animal mascot Ryo-ohki, fighting the rival of Tsunami, who is trying to take power in the magic realm, complete with Tenchi discovering Sasami's alter ego. But then Tenchi gets transformed into the monster, and Sasami as Sammy defeats him while Tsunami pretends to be Sasami during a play that was about Pretty Sammy starring Sasami. And I promise that's not nearly as convoluted as it sounds. And even with my limited knowledge of magical girl anime, I don't think this premise could get any more textbook magical girl than that. Though sometimes cliche stuff is good for a fun little romp, and it was fun seeing these characters in this kind of world for a little bit, though I am hoping that when I cover the OVAs they have a little more to them than these chapters did, since they were pretty bare bones. Afterwards though, it's time to dive back into a more serious plot heavy arc once again, one I actually enjoyed much more than the initial Yakage arc, and it starts off with Minagi doing her space pirating like she said the last time that we saw her, but she accidentally attacks an innocent ship helmed by a young girl, who mistakenly recognizes Minagi as Ryoko and tries to run away, which is a nice little nod to Ryoko being a notorious space pirate throughout the universe, which I appreciate since it kind of gets forgotten over time in the OVAs. Though Minagi does try to clear up the confusion, accidentally chasing the girl all the way to Earth, where crazily enough she crash lands at Tenchi's house. And when she wakes up after the crash, we find out that as the daughter of a famous wood sculptor from an ally planet to Jirai, she's an old friend of Sasami and Ayeka, with her planet being responsible for making the wood frames of the Jiraiyan ships, which I think was a cool way to work the story into the pre-established canon and add depth to a part of it that had no explanation before. Because we always see these big Jiraiyan ships with these super ornate wood frames, even though the ships themselves are small pods, so it's cool to find out there's a planet out there that specializes in making the frames, at least in this canon. But apparently things on the planet aren't great, with the girl, whose name is Asahi, being the daughter of the master wood sculptor, who's been overthrown and imprisoned by his rival student, with Asahi escaping the planet to try and find help to stop him, which of course the whole Tenchi squad offers to help with, including Minagi, which is cool because the last time that we saw her, it seemed like she would just disappear into the ether, never really being seen or heard from again, only leaving a mark as a one-off character. But I'm glad they brought her back in the story. She's fun and adds a different element to the mix, which I like better than the resolution with Zero in the second OVA, since this gives us a whole new character to explore, rather than just disappearing and leaving us with basically the same Ryoko. And the whole first half of this arc is pretty fun, not taking itself too seriously like the first one kind of did, with the crew running around the universe getting into different shenanigans, something I really enjoyed about this section of the manga. And I just wish the OVAs could have taken a route similar to this, of exploring more of the universe and different planets and cultures within. A gripe I've had with the series that I'll probably get more in depth on once we get to GXP. But for now, the manga probably does the best job of making the universe feel big and widely inhabited, with the crew stumbling onto a planet that's under tyrannical rule, where the group is captured and made to be slaves, during which Ryoko and Tenchi befriend a monk in training named Goge, and meanwhile Ayeka's group escape, causing the king to come to the mine, where Tenchi ends up defeating him and saving the planet from his tyranny. And this planetary pit stop was pretty fun. Unfortunately, to summarize it, I do miss a lot of the comedy that happens throughout, like copious amounts of fourth wall breaks from the cast, or Ryoko and Tenchi's interactions with our monk friend Goge, or dominatrix Ayeka. I mean, what more can I say? But the comedy in the manga is usually pretty on point, excluding the occasional miss, like this one bit where a random guy is questioning the legitimacy of the main villain, seemingly in his own inner monologue, with him being taken away and the villain saying he should have stuck to thought balloons, which really didn't land for me, as it was hard to tell if he was actually speaking out loud or not. And even with the fourth wall break being somewhat humorous, it just doesn't work well the way it was done. Despite that though, the manga usually captures the Tenchi style really well in its mix of comedy and drama, with the planet-side shenanigans of our heroes being more lighthearted with less emphasis on dramatic tension, but in the background of the more lighthearted adventure of our main crew, we get some information on the enemies they'll be facing, revealed to be some creepy-looking assassin-like figures who wear cloaks, masks, and have large claws for hands, with one showing up on Earth looking for them, where they end up running into Grandpa, who fights off the invader while looking after Taro, which ends up being a pretty cool fight, and is nice to see Grandpa show off again, since he's always touted as a legendary warrior in most incarnations of Tenchi, despite never really getting a chance to show it off outside of his fight with Kagato in OVA 1. And they also managed to connect his fight with Tenchi's fight against the king of the planet they are on, with the special sword Tenchi used to defeat the king being revealed to be a sibling blade, where we find out that the other was given to Grandpa, meaning that he must have been to that planet before. And that's a nice way of fleshing out some of Yosho's history in the manga, though it did feel more like an afterthought than a cool plot point, and I wish we could have learned more about it before jumping into the next thing, which is the main plot, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because I rather enjoyed this little detour in the galaxy. It was fun and fresh, and maybe not the most complex or original idea I've ever seen, but I wouldn't mind visiting another planet or two just to see the world building and interesting new races and ideas you could explore with that. But alas, we return to the crew on the ship with Goge now in tow, with him and the others getting acquainted, though not without difficulty, as it turns out he's an old friend of Asahi and her family, conveniently enough, which is a bit contrived that they just happened to run into him during their detour on the random planet, with his explanation of being on a pilgrimage and it just so happens he collapsed on that specific planet not really hand-waving it for me. And despite him being a fun character most of the time, he just doesn't really add much to the story here, aside from a romantic subplot with Asahi that I'm not sure I'm too comfortable with.
Yikes.
As well as some not really needed comic relief. But one thing he does add is some lore, as he's revealed to be a member of a thought-to-be extinct alien race known as the Guguchians, who normally look humanoid but have the ability to transform into a larger, more powerful form with longer hair. Now, where have I heard that before? Which just adds another tick on the contrivance counter with this guy. I mean, what are we gonna find out next about him? Did he buy the winning lottery ticket at the space gas station? And while his transformation has a pretty cool design that's somewhat similar to the King of the Planet where we met Goge, who wasn't also a Guguchian, I guess, as well as significant power and agility to go along with it, which he shows off in a fight against the assassin who previously fought against Grandpa, who goes by the name Mushima, and retreats after Goge is able to get the better of him, mostly due to his arm being injured previously in his fight with Grandpa, which I think is a pretty cool way of working the two plots together, as well as showing off Goge's abilities. Though, like I said earlier, he just doesn't really add much to the group. I mean, the team's already pretty stacked with fighters, and while he does have funny gags here and there, we also have plenty of comic relief on the squad already. I mean, Mahoshi is here for God's sakes. But enough about Goge, let's cut to planet Ryuten, where after Mushima returns badly injured, he pulls out a crystal and gives it to another one of the cloaked enemies named Hishima, saying it carries all his memories and experiences within it, which Hishima accepts, with Mushima falling off the edge and dying thereafter. And afterwards, we get some exposition about what's going on, with the new master sculptor Tatsuki showing off his skills and also seeming to feel rather unfulfilled after accomplishing his goal of ruling the planet, which is a bit of heavy-handed foreshadowing that reveals its purpose after our heroes arrive on the planet, with Asahi being captured almost immediately and Tatsuki forcing her father to lead him and the others to the hiding place of the master wood sculptor's secrets. But doing so would mean that they'd have to destroy statues gifted to Asahi's mother before she passed away, something that not only upsets Asahi but also Tatsuki, who it turns out was also in love with Asahi's mother back in the day, making it hard for him to do it and causing his cloak compatriot to use even stronger mind control to force him, as it turns out that he was actually being manipulated by them all along, with them using his jealousy towards Asahi's father to easily control his mind and force him to do all the things that have led up to this point, now causing him to attack the others. Luckily though, he's stopped by Asahi's father, causing the mind control to fade as well as Asahi's bindings, leaving ample opportunity for Ryoko to teleport everyone to safety, unfortunately leaving the enemy behind to collect the secrets that they've been after. And after their escape, they ask Tatsuki what it is that they're planning, though with his memory being fuzzy, the only thing he recalls is an enormous tree, something Ayeka postulates might be a royal tree from Jirai that was stolen over 1,000 years ago named Bizan, which is an interesting discovery if true, since it's very rare in the series to find royal trees outside of Jiraiyan control, even just as seeds, with this plot point being somewhat similar to the original J from the OVA canon, which I think is another cool way the manga expands on what we know and don't know about the previously established universe. And before this, we also get a flashback from Minagi recalling something from the past where Yakage was forced to give up a special sword, similar to the one Tenchi received during their planetary detour, being forced by the cloak figures who are currently wreaking havoc on Ryuten to give it up in order to save Minagi, which obviously he does, with Minagi saying that if he had kept the sword, he would have been able to finish his research much sooner. And Minagi suddenly remembering something like this is usually something I would call contrived, but her having amnesia during her first appearance does go a long way to making that and this moment feel more natural and set up, even if it might not have been intentional from the outset. And this memory causes Minagi to go out on her own to confront the enemy in order to get the sword back, after which perspective switches to our cloaked friends carrying out their plans, with one cool little detail in particular I'd like to highlight, where one of them speaks in a different language to cause an elevator to start from the middle of the bridge. And the elevator thing's cool and all, but I really like the addition of speaking another language here, something that the rest of the series don't do, at least often enough for me to recall. And it's a small detail, but one that makes it much more immersive for me, as usually Tenchi isn't very diverse, with only a couple of different races and cultures we get to see throughout the different series. The manga, however, has taken away that gripe I've had with the series for a long time, introducing new races, cultures, and now languages, something I wish could be more fleshed out as it goes on, but unfortunately will not be the case. Getting back to the machinations of the evildoers though, they use the secrets that they stole on the royal tree, which brings out a young looking girl who immediately hits them and says that they're late, which turns out to be the brains behind their plan named Yume, who was inside the tree in order to preserve its life force, since as we learned from Grandpa in OVA 2, usually when you plant a royal tree it loses its power over time. Now that Yume is out though, she claims to be the greatest scientific genius in the galaxy, also announcing her intentions to pick a fight with the Jirai royal family. An interesting twist, I thought, as it also turns out that the cloaked men were actually her creations. Similar, I guess, with Washu and Ryoko and Minagi and Yakage. Though her claim is a bold one, does she truly rival or even surpass Washu's genius? Perhaps, as she's now able to control the royal trees thanks to her plan. As well, we also get somewhat of an analog battle between the two when Minagi shows up to reclaim the sword, which Yume is now adorning herself with. And when Minagi sees it, she asks her to return it, a request Yume flat out denies, leading to a fight between Minagi and Hishima. And Minagi is pretty clearly outclassed in the fight, which is filled with Hishima moving faster than she can keep up with. When we cut away from the fight to everyone else heading to Ryujin to help, only to cut back to the fight after Minagi's been defeated, though she's able to save herself thanks to Yakage's memory. And I'm really starting to like Minagi's character and how she's still struggling with Yakage's death and trying to still honor his memory. One thing I didn't like here though was how they off-screened or off-paged the end of the fight, with the cutaway to the rest of the team that felt completely unnecessary. Which isn't totally a knock against this story in particular, as I hate this story beat whenever it comes up in pretty much anything. Because the only reason it's here is that they think the audience is stupid and won't like a chapter that just focuses on one character without the rest showing up in some capacity. And it's so annoying to be taken out of something you're invested in to quote-unquote build tension by cutting to the group for several pages, only for Ryoko to say the only thing of note, which is an arbitrary estimated time of arrival. Especially in this particular story where it's more action focused than most other Tenchi stories. And the action in the manga is usually pretty dynamic and flows really well, which I enjoy reading, so it's unfortunate when they decide to cut away from it for something much less interesting in my opinion. Then cut back to Minagi like I'm still supposed to be invested in what's happening, which I'll be honest was kind of hard, with Minagi nearly sacrificing herself to save Asahi's ship after the fight. Something that if it had blown up, I wouldn't have really cared about, and I would prefer Minagi not risk her life to try and save it, since like I said earlier, I'm really starting to like Minagi's character here, and I've yet to really care that much about Asahi or Goge. And despite the fact that in the manga, the shipboard AIs are more characters in their own right than in the animated depictions, which I thought was a cool way to take advantage of the fact that most ships have their own consciousness. Even if I didn't really care about any of them as individual characters, I still think it was an interesting way to flesh out more of the universe. But Minagi manages to save the ship and make it off the planet barely alive, being picked up by our heroes and healed by Washu, where they have a sweet moment together. Meanwhile though, Goge asks Tenchi for help training, which Tenchi accepts, ending off the volume, with the next volume starting off with Yume and her flying space tree running into Mahoshi's ship, where she proceeds to take it out, but luckily without destroying Yukinojo, who sends out a call to Mahoshi now that Yume's dropped her communications jamming, leading them to head there to see what happened, also interrupting Tenchi and Goge's intense fourth wall breaking training. And after arriving, Yukinojo shows Washu a video of what happened, where Yume announces who she is, which causes an interesting reaction from Washu, but also shows her tree using light hawk wings, a revelation that causes Mahoshi to contact the GP, with word ultimately making its way back to Jirai, where we get a quick little cameo from Funaho and Masaki, which is fun, even if it doesn't really add much. And afterwards, the crew is back to chasing Yume using the special sword that Tenchi received to track her sword, with Yume saying it's time to greet an old friend when she discovers them, most likely referring to Washu, as she talks as though she knows her, with Washu revealing that they were classmates at the Galaxy Academy, who were always competing with each other over the top spot in their class, prompting Washu to remark that if it weren't for her, Yume would be the greatest scientific genius in the universe. And in response to this, Mahoshi mentions Dr. Clay, which I guess means that the events of OVA 2 are canon to the manga, meaning that the stuff with Zero happened as well, though they didn't mention it during Minagi's attack in the first arc. So does that mean that it happened afterward? Or in the case of real life, Okuda had no idea about it, so couldn't include it in the first arc. Either way, it's a weird inclusion because on one hand, it's some cool connective tissue to the OVAs, but on the other hand, since the manga is its own canon, it raises some questions that don't have answers. Like, if everything with Dr. Clay happened, then that means that Tokimi exists in this universe, because she was the whole driving force of that arc. And spoilers here if you haven't seen OVA 3, but that means Washu and Tsunami are goddesses, which is kind of a big deal in retrospect. As well as other stuff like if ryo-ohki assimilated with the masses or not, since she hasn't transformed at all in the manga so far. And ryo-ohki assimilating with the masses was something that I was a little harsh on when it happened in OVA 2, but it did really add more to her character, and to be honest, I kind of missed having her more involved, since she doesn't really get to do anything else but show up for an occasional carrot joke. But that tangent aside, Yume invites our heroes aboard her tree ship, where she and Washu get to catching up, with their fists, in a pretty cool little hand-to-hand fight that ends quickly with them both complimenting each other on their respective styles, leading Washu to abruptly ask Yume why she's doing all this, which makes her upset as she explains it's due to a wager they made back at the academy over drinks, that whoever between the two of them takes down Jirai first will take take the loser as a slave. A wager Washu had no recollection of due to the heavy drinking of that night, which I thought was a great way to introduce Yume's motivations, with the flashback being perfectly in character for Washu, with her even teasing Yume about wanting to take her as a slave. I also like that it ties back to Washu, so everyone getting mixed up in this situation is less random chance and more a direct result of Washu's carelessness from long ago. And now Washu has to take responsibility, which she does by challenging Yume to another wager, saying that they'll settle it man to man. So in response, Yume elects Hishima to fight, an outcome Washu didn't predict, so she passes the buck for the fight to Goge, for them to finally have the match between the two, which Hishima's been chomping at the bit to have ever since he recovered Mushima's memories, with him being even stronger than Mushima per Yume's own admission. But first, Ryoko steps in her first real appearance in quite a few chapters, just to be told she can't beat him because Washu had to take her blood to heal Minagi. And with that out of the way, the fight is ready to begin, when we cut to Misaki and Funaho again, apparently heading to retrieve Bizun with the whole Jiraiyan fleet in tow. But despite that, Funaho feels uneasy, with us cutting to a dream of Sasami's where the two of them get sucked into darkness. Some ham-fisted foreshadowing that never comes up again, and we leave off there as we cut back to the fight where Goge is hesitant to transform with Asahi watching, as he's afraid she'll hate him if she knew about his other form, which is used very comedically when Asahi asks why he doesn't just transform, revealing she's known the whole time despite Goge trying to keep it a secret for so long. And I'll say it again for emphasis, but the comedy in this manga is pretty on point most of the time. And once again, I unfortunately have to skim a lot of it, or else this video would be much longer, but I definitely recommend checking it out for yourself if you like what you've heard. Getting back to the fight though, Goge transforms and assumes a defensive position, the legendary peekaboo block, which leads to him storing Hishima's attack energy and firing it back at him in a Kamehameha-like energy blast, which proves to do little but disrobe Hishima, where Yume reveals she created Hishima based on the Gaguchians, and that he has a self-evolving mechanism where he's able to take the abilities of the people he's fought against. And with him about to deliver the finishing blow on Goge, Tenchi jumps in to make the save, blocking Hishima's attack. So the fight between Tenchi and Hishima begins, with Tenchi on the back foot, but still in the fight. But thanks to Hishima's self-evolving mechanism, he uses Goge's technique for massive damage, with Tenchi barely able to stand afterward, which is when they're interrupted by the arrival of the Jirai royal fleet, which Yume uses the secret files she acquired along with Bizun to completely take control of, prompting Tenchi to finish the fight in order to stop her per Washu's wager, using his powers to bring out his Light Hawk wings and beating Hishima in one blow, which causes some rubble to almost fall on Yume, with her only being saved by her other creation, who Goge defeated earlier, who ends up sacrificing himself to save her, causing her to break down into tears, which wasn't particularly a powerful moment for me, but is important to mention as this is the point where they start to redeem Yume, since now Bizun's lost control and is in danger of starting an explosive chain reaction that could destroy the entire galaxy, which I think is kind of haphazard and comes out of nowhere just for there to be big galaxy ending stakes to the arc. Plus to redeem Yume, which I'm fine with even if the way they go about it is pretty ham-fisted, as I like Yume, and much like Minagi, she'll be coming back later in the story. But after everyone gives up hope for stopping Bizun, Tenchi steps up to tell them not to give up and leads them to try and save everyone, which I thought was a great moment since Tenchi doesn't often have take charge moments like this. Usually he's just getting dragged along with the story, but this shows some growth on his part, actually taking up the mantle of leadership, if albeit briefly, something that both Washu and Funaho take note of, and is important for if he's gonna actually become king of Jirai someday. Although despite Tenchi taking charge and trying to lead everyone to save the day, they're unfortunately not able to stop the chain reaction, but luckily Tsunami shows up and is able to stop it, which is kind of an anticlimactic ending to the whole situation, if I'm being honest. But with that, the arc comes to a close, much like the first one did, with us catching up at the Misaki house after some time has passed, where they receive a letter from Asahi, thanking them and telling them about what she's been up to. My favorite part about the resolution, though, has to be Minagi visiting Yakage's grave to tell him that she got his sword back, which I thought was a really touching moment. And with that, we're about halfway through the manga, which is why I'm going to be splitting this into 2 videos. So make sure you're subscribed, because next time I'm going to be talking about the second half of the manga, which I'm really looking forward to, as I've enjoyed this first half quite a bit, with the manga truly capturing the feel of Tenchi Muyo, seamlessly merging the elements that made Tenchi great into the story, with excellent art to go along with it. Though one complaint I do have about the art is the lack of backgrounds, as they're only really used in establishing shots, with most panels feeling pretty empty when there's no action going on. Though when the action gets going, it's done well, with it being more prominent here than in the OVAs, but also not foregoing the classic Tenchi DNA, making sure to include interesting slice of life stuff as well, which are fun but non-essential, so you can skim through them if you aren't particularly interested in a specific story. One other complaint I have with the manga also though is its pacing in the more story-driven arcs, with it moving at a pretty breakneck pace most of the time, hardly giving us any meaningful time to spend with most of the characters, especially the new ones, which is probably why I didn't really end up caring about Asahi or Goge much. As well, Yume kind of flips her motivations on a dime, making for a bit of an anticlimax to an arc that otherwise was pretty strong. Though Yume's character does shine through and make an impression in the arc. As well, she'll have more time to be explored when she shows up later, with the second half having some pretty interesting stuff to it as well. So I can't wait to get to it, and I hope you'll join me there. This has been CJ from Team Millennium Ninja, headed back to the village hidden in the internet.